Welcome, everyone. We'll just give folks a minute to join. You have found the first town hall of the year for UERU. It's entitled The State of Student Wellbeing, Navigating Pressure, Belonging, and AI on Campus. I'm Steve Dandino, privileged to serve both as the Executive Director of the Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, as well as Associate Provost at Colorado State University, which has hosted URU since 2013. Welcome to you all. We're delighted by your interest in our topic today, which is, I think, perfect way to begin the 2026-27 academic year. Again, the state of student well-being, navigating pressure, belonging, and AI on campus. It's a collaboration with two of our most favorite groups, the Coalition for Student Wellness and the LearningWell Coalition. So you'll be hearing from members of both of those groups during today's town hall. Just to remind everyone, town hall is recorded and posted both at ueru.org and YouTube. We'll be using the chat function. Feel free to use the raise hand function when it comes time for Q&A. We have over 350 who are registered, so we expect a pretty large audience, and using that raise hand function will be really helpful for seeing your questions. But feel free to use the chat just for that purpose as well. Again, welcome everyone. We'll get started here momentarily. The state of student well-being, navigating pressure, belonging, and AI on campus. I'm really delighted to be able to introduce a long-standing colleague of ours here at UERU, Dr. Angela Lindner, who serves currently as director of the LearningWell Coalition and was former undergraduate vice provost at the University of Florida for many years. And Angela, I was looking at your LearningWell Coalition membership, and of course it includes all sorts of URU members, among them Arizona State, Boston College, Kent State, MIT, Florida, Miami, Southern Cal, Utah, UVA, Wake, and Wash U. But the one that really jumped out at me was Al Quain University in Ifrane, Morocco. I'm maybe one of the few people, or not the only person on the call, who taught there for a while, a couple of times. I had a great privilege of teaching at Al Quain. Great educators, wonderful people, the American model of education, private university in Morocco. And it's no surprise to me that they're members of LearningWell Coalition, because super smart and caring educators there. Thank you for joining us today and for helping to introduce this important topic.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your wonderful introduction. I would expect nothing less than your warmth and kindness, knowing you for as long as I have. Representing the LearningWell Coalition today in this discussion that is so important to all of us, probably the utmost importance, the well-being of our students, alongside two people I most highly admire, you, Steve, and Carson, is a privilege I don't take lightly. I also honor that the student's voice is the centerpiece of our focus today, so I'll be brief in this introduction of our discussion that is of utmost urgency in higher education today. I first became familiar with the work of URU in 2015. And that was the year when I was newly appointed as Associate Provost for Undergrad Affairs at the University of Florida. And I became very quickly entrenched in that important work of a UVP, which included leading our large campus and creating and developing a core general education program now known as UF Quest. And Steve entered into my chaos with a gentle reminder of UF's charter membership in URU, thanks to my predecessor, Dr. Bernard Mayer, and encouragement that paying our dues might be of benefit to the current hard work of our campus. As always, Steve was right. One of the many influences that URU has had on our work at UF has included the Boyer 2030 report released in 2022, still within my arm's reach. I prove it here. I have my book here. The ideals of Boyer 2030 prompted me to encourage UF to double down on our commitment to URU and to apply for membership in the LearningWell Coalition about 3 years ago now, and recently to humbly join the dedicated leadership team of this organization. Now, with this broader vantage point of the new role that it affords me, I'm even more hopeful in the report's vision being realized because UF, other coalition and URU institutions are heavily salted with people motivated by a heightened sense of urgency to centering their mission on lifelong flourishing of all students in work and life, which also happens to be the mission of the LearningWell Coalition. This mission translates to the coalition's bold vision that every student graduates with a clarified sense of identity, purpose, agency, belonging, and character, laying a groundwork for a life of well-being enriched by meaningful work and relationships. The coalition now boasts nearly 45 member universities, each with academic initiatives that are evidence-based, at scale, or promise to be, that is across all the undergraduate population, and designed to positively impact the long-term flourishing of their graduates. The North Star of our members' academic initiatives is relationship-rich nurturing through experiential learning. And this combination is a force multiplier of student overall well-being long after graduation. You can refer to our website, learningwell.org, and/or reach out to me directly if you're curious about becoming a member or want to learn about resources available to you. You'll find on our website best practices in advancing student well-being through our Learning Well Exchange, and access to our excellent and beautiful magazine, the Learning Well magazine, and podcast, Learning Well Radio, which showcase the great work of our members and beyond. The coalition also offers 2 different faculty learning communities that focus on best practices in learner-centered education and institutional culture change, respectively. Our coalition efforts also involved assessment and survey practices that combine with other studies to give us a more complete picture of the state of college student well-being, the reason we are gathered here today. For example, the latest results from the Michigan Healthy Minds study reported the promising news of significant sustained improvements in student mental health across key measures that indicate severe distress, like severe depression, generalized anxiety, and suicidal ideation, even though the percentages are still troubling. This study also reported a slight decrease in indicators of student flourishing and positive well-being, which include self-esteem, purpose, and optimism, echoing results from a recent Harvard Graduate School of Education study that reported 60% of the students surveyed expressed a lack of purpose or direction in their lives, and 44% who said they do not feel that they matter to others. Armed with these results and those from the Gallup Foundation and other sources that consistently tell us that the relationship-rich practices of mentorships with faculty and staff, internships, study abroad, research, and community service positively shape students' flourishing for life, the coalition recently partnered with AAC&U and Morning Consult to survey students on their motivations to go to college, what they value most in college, and what high-impact practices they actually access during college. 38% of the 850 students surveyed considered intrinsic factors, such as intellectual and personal growth, identity formation, and giving back as being the primary reasons they attend college, compared to only about 36.5% who named extrinsic factors, such as getting a good job or meeting expectations of others as their primary reason for attending. At the same time, our recent study found that students who are motivated to go to college by these intrinsic factors are much more likely to engage in relationship-rich practices associated with higher levels of lifelong well-being compared to students motivated by extrinsic factors. In fact, I was awakened by engineering students expressing their intrinsic motivations applied to their desires and career in a class I taught last spring. Much of the class hosted guest speakers who were current and former distinguished research faculty, CEOs, presidents, vice presidents, representing higher ed, corporations, law firms, national labs. The guests consistently advised students that to be successful, there is no such thing as balance in career and life. Many students in my class persistently, and I would say courageously, pushed back on this message as they expressed their vision of a good life, including a fulfilling career and life outside of career. My students taught me that an increasing number of students today have a better understanding than my generation that a singular focus on climbing the ladder of career may very well end up with their discovering, once they're at the top, that the ladder is leaning against the wrong wall, paraphrasing Thomas Merton. So, listening to students through surveys, direct engagement on our campuses, and in panel discussions like we're about to hear today guides us much more accurately to individual and collective action by everyone on our campuses, especially faculty and administrators. In this case, to fully support lifelong well-being, we must liberate our students and our own universities from the burden of the notion that the only purpose of college is to punch a ticket toward a job. And we must provide access to and participate in these relationship-rich, lifelong giving experiences available to all students, not just for a portion of our population. As we grapple with how to accomplish this, let's now listen to students themselves. This panel of students led by Carson Domey of C4SW will give us an opportunity to begin the new academic year the right way, with our hearts and minds centered on students' voices and experiences. Carson, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lindner, and thank you very much, Dr. Danenow, for having us here today. So always so energizing to see the amount of administrators that we have here today gathered to hear the discussion that we're about to have with Anish, Maisha, and Layli about student health and well-being going into the fall 2026 semester. My name is Carson Domey. I serve as the co-founder and executive director of the Coalition for Student Wellbeing. We actually turned 2 years old coming up in 2 weeks, so we're still a relatively new organization. But our mission is to improve student well-being by bridging the gap between students and decision makers through advocacy, collaboration, and education. And so, town halls like this, resources such as our student-ran Substack, which highlights different student perspectives or policies that students are advocating for within higher education, are just some of the numerous ways that we seek to convene a coalition of students, just as much so administrators. And so with that, I would love to bring in Anish, Maisha, and Layli. And first to start, would just love for each of them to introduce themselves, where you're from, what year you are, what you're studying, and why don't we start with you first, Maisha?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. My name is Maisha Albi, and I am a sophomore at Yale University studying psychology and the history of science, medicine, and public health.
Hi everyone, my name's Layli Balagi. I'm also a sophomore. I study at Arizona State University Barrett the Honors College. I'm majoring in neuroscience and minoring in finance.
Hi everyone, my name is Anish Chantala. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I attend Georgia Tech University, Georgia Tech Institute of Technology. And I am majoring in neuroscience as well as business. And yeah, I'm an incoming first year.
Amazing. And as I'm sure everybody will see, all members of your institution, all students are members of your institutions, but also such a great diversity of major year. I was really, really excited that Anish in particular was able to give us the perspective as we talk about an incoming freshman. I think that's something that's hard to find this early in the semester. And so I'm glad we're able to say that. And I also would be remiss and somehow forgot to mention that I attend the University of Texas at Austin. Just graduated in May and beginning my master's in public affairs there there at the LBJ school, so still in school. But to start, would love to begin with you, Layli, and then turn to Anish and Maisha. As students at large research universities, what pressure have affected your well-being the most, and how have they influenced your academic experiences, relationships, or sense of stability while in college?
One of the greatest pressures I've experienced is trying to balance academic expectations with major personal transitions. As an international student from Vancouver, Canada, I had to adjust to living in a new country, being away from my support system, and navigating an unfamiliar academic and social environment. I'm also on the pre-medical track where there is a significant pressure to maintain strong grades, gain clinical and research experience, as well as remain involved in leadership and service. During my freshman year last year, I also experienced a significant loss within my family. So, with that comes a lot of grief, and managing this grief while continuing school showed me that academic performance cannot be separated from a student's emotional well being. These pressures affected my sense of stability, my relationships, and the way I approach school. They also taught me that students may appear successful academically while privately struggling. I feel that universities need to recognize that well-being is not separate from education. Rather, it directly affects a student's ability to learn, connect with others, and remain engaged.
Anish, would love to hear your thoughts.
All right. And so for me, I think the biggest things that have essentially affected my well-being and essentially my academic experience, relationships, and sense of stability are things like the academic pressures that come when it comes to like going to a rigorous school. And so with that, like the fear of not having the best grades or not being able to do all the work, essentially a lot of the academic pressures that come with school, as well as the essential like fear of like the potential careers. And so like making sure that we have like the internships, the experiences, and all of these different things needed in order to essentially get these jobs that we want. A lot of that kind of adds on to the pressure, a lot of academic and a career focused pressure. As well as for me specifically, I'm an out-of-state student, and so coming to a big public university, it's a little bit different just because I'm coming in with a little bit of less knowledge about not just the environment, but also I don't know as many people. And so that kind of is a bit of a struggle when coming into a new environment and a new place. And so that's kind of the biggest pressures that have affected me.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to add that has been very unique right now is that to me, students aren't just navigating kind of the ordinary pressures of college anymore. I feel like we're also navigating a lot of uncertainty about higher education itself, whether it's, public scrutiny of universities kind of at a federal government level, which has been true for Yale at the moment and countless other schools, or questions about, what opportunities will look like on campus and also after graduation. There's this underlying feeling that the landscape is constantly shifting. And as a student, that can feel very exhausting and confusing. Especially at a research university, I've definitely seen how changes in policy and restrictions have definitely affected both students and faculty alike. I think research thrives when people are able to ask those really difficult questions. And so when there are concerns about what we can or can't study or what we can and can't say, students definitely notice that. And I think that is really, declining our experiences and our student well-being as a whole. So I think it's important now more than ever, especially as so many different communities are trying to navigate this very unprecedented situation right now in higher education, just to increase communication and transparency as much as possible so that, misinformation doesn't spread and that students feel very supported and connected to their community.
Amazing. And for this next question, specifically for Layli and Maisha, you both just finished your freshman year and are entering your sophomore years now. Kind of based on your first year on your respective campuses, what experiences, communities, or institutional practices have helped you feel that you belong on campus? And where do you think that universities might be falling short? And kind of with that, how do you think that we can do better?
Yeah, I
Layli, why
can
don't
help you
we
do that
start
real
with you?
quick. Make sure.
The
Have you
communities
been
that
here
have,
for a while?
oh, sorry. The communities that have helped me
Uh,
feel the greatest
Sorry about
sense of
that.
belonging are those where students are given meaningful opportunities to meet, connect, contribute, and feel understood. I personally have built my relationships with majority of students who share similar interests and values through several organizations and clubs. I've also personally used my university's free counseling services, and having access to that support was very meaningful to me during a difficult period in my life. It showed me how valuable campus mental health resources can be when students know where they are available and feel comfortable using them. However, universities can still fall short, I believe, in reaching students who do not immediately become involved or who may feel isolated because of grief, culture, finances, identity, or simply just being far away from home. Specifically for me as an international student, I was adapting to an entirely new culture while also trying to succeed academically and build a new support system around myself. And similar with first generation students, grieving students, and students from underrepresented backgrounds may also feel that available services do not fully understand their circumstances. Institutions should not assume that students will independently find the resources. Rather, I believe support needs to be visible, proactive, culturally responsive, and integrated into the everyday student experience rather than introduced only after someone reaches a crisis.
Yeah, for me, honestly, community has made all of the difference for me. I think universities do a really great job when they create spaces where students can find people who share some part of their identity. For me, that has been cultural organizations. For me, my culture was a very large part of my upbringing and how I view the world still to this day, especially when you're in first year and you're feeling as homesick as ever. It's so important to find a community that share the same traditions that you do at home. And also as a first generation low income student, I've also really appreciated seeing what we call FGLI community continue to grow and having people who understand just as much as you do those kind of quiet battles that you face has made navigating college um, feel much less isolating. So I would definitely encourage the funding and support of these spaces that make students, feel so much more welcome and at home in a community.
Thank you for both of your perspectives there. And Anisha, a slightly different variant of this question for you. As you enter what will be your freshman year at Georgia Tech, is there anything that you've already seen that works well that has made you feel supported in the transition, or did higher ed miss the mark on something? Is there an opportunity for the experience to be better for students to come? Over to you.
So for me personally, I have the privilege of living in a living learning community, and I think that has given me a lot of benefit. So essentially, a living learning community, as most of you know, is like a first year community that a lot of students will join just to meet new people. And it's for mine specifically, it's essentially aligned to the science majors. And so being with these students who are also going through the same majors, taking the same classes, as well as also looking for a community has been a very big benefit because I've already gone to meet some of them and have talked to them and have created these connections with these students. And I think for me, that kind of gives me a sense of understanding of kind of what the community will be like. And it has given me the chance to already build relations. And so it kind of lowers my fear of going into somewhere new. And I think that's something that a lot of universities should look into implementing. I think it's super useful just because I've been able to talk to staff who are directly aligned with this living learning community who can guide me and help me. And I think that has been a big benefit, as well as the new student orientation. As most of you know, all schools kind of do that. And for me specifically, my new school orientation was essentially very helpful just because not only did we go through registration for classes, but we got to do a lot of things like going over traditions, going over different things about the campus itself. And that kind of gave me a sense of being more comfortable with going into a new school, especially going from high school to college.
Amazing. We've talked a bit about different kind of pain points in the student experience that applies to a lot of people, whether that be financial concerns, academic competition, and uncertainty about life after graduation. Kind of based off of those, I would love to open it up to the three of you to just talk about, to give, these administrators some insight on how do these pressures shape your student experience? How do they affect your education? How do they affect your involvement? And most importantly, how do they affect your well-being? Maisha, why don't we start with you?
I think a lot of students like me have grown up with kind of what we call hustle culture, like this idea that you're always supposed to be doing more. And I think somewhere along the way, it kind of almost has become like a badge of honor. I feel like we always kind of joke and compare, not sleeping and skipping meals to finish work, but of course, over time, that really does take a toll on your mental health. When you add financial pressures onto that, especially for students who are helping support not only themselves, but their families, it becomes even harder to slow down because success is tied to how am I going to support my family in the future. And um, I think these pressures are especially pronounced and prevalent in many minority communities. As someone who grew up in a first generation Asian American household, I knew that there has always been kind of an added expectation to work twice as hard, to avoid failure at all costs, and to prioritize achievement over your well being. And knowing that that is my experience and also the experience of so many other minority students like me, I am such a strong advocate for culturally sensitive mental health care. Supporting students isn't just about increasing access to, counseling and different services, but also making sure that those counseling and services are able to see students, in the full context of their identities. And I think especially in academic institutions of very high pressure, I think it's so important to understand the student as a whole and why they may be feeling the way that they do or have the pressure that they do to succeed.
Laylee or Nish, whoever would like to go first.
I believe that financial concerns can shape nearly every decision a student makes. And as an international student, the tuition, housing, transportation, and all their expenses can create additional pressure not only for me, but for my family as well, especially because employment and financial aid opportunities are more limited. Students may choose courses, leadership positions, internships, or even career paths based on what they can afford rather than what would be most meaningful or beneficial to them. Some students may also work long hours, reduce their course loads, avoid unpaid opportunities, or even withdraw from campus involvement because they simply cannot afford the time. In terms of academic competition, I feel that academic competition also makes students feel that they must constantly do more. There can be lots of pressure to maintain high grades while still completing research, clinical work, volunteering, networking, all of that. This can make rest feel unproductive and can cause students to compare themselves with others rather than focus on their own growth. Uncertainty about graduate school as well, employment and life after graduation adds another layer of stress, and universities should provide more accessible and clear career guidance, financial support, mentorship, and reassurance that there is not one perfect timeline or path to success.
I think that both of them covered it really well. I think for me, I think some of the bigger things are like academic competition, especially going to a very rigorous school, kind of seeing the pressures that like even before attending campus, like I'm already seeing like how intense the culture can be. And so essentially like the club culture being very competitive and not really bringing out a space for all students to feel included is something that I'm a bit worried about. But I think that's something that campuses can really guide students with by ensuring that it's okay. There's like not a perfect timeline, like Laylee said, that there's always going to be a way to get to your final goal. And so essentially like the academic competition, kind of that future career uncertainty, students not really choosing things that they're interested in, not exploring their interests just because they're still focused on that career path and trying to be the practical way. And so that's some of the big things that I think are kind of how these academic competitiveness kind of shape student well-being.
All three of you just set the stage for a question that is not on our script, but a question that I would love to ask. Kind of with the backdrop of us talking about hustle culture, with us talking about the pressures around academia. Something that came to my mind during this conversation was I had the opportunity to speak at the launch of the World Happiness Report a couple of months ago, and something that we were talking about of why I'm such a believer in higher education's role to kind of help address the youth well-being challenge is the fact of higher education's opportunity to help people find their purpose. I'm a firm believer that there's so much work that we can do in kind of that realm of helping, when anybody, has a purpose, whether that be, career or technical, whether that be a vocation, the opportunity that higher education has to help people find that, I think, is unparomounted when you look at other institutions. And so kind of to your point, Anish, I'd love to ask y'all to kind of do a quick go around here basically answering the question of in your, I guess this might apply a little bit more so to Maisha and Laylee, but also to you, Niche, of like in your experience in higher education so far, navigating your coursework, especially since this audience is a lot of folks that work in the academic policy side of higher education. I guess my question is, have you felt like you've been able to adequately explore other interests outside of your major, based on kind of the degree requirements of your school or your specific major? Whoever would like to take that first.
I can take this one first. So I'm lucky enough to where when I'm studying neuroscience that my major has a built-in breadth where I can use that as a minor. And so I'm able to use that to concentrate on other things or even use that as my double major requirements, things like that. And so that's why I think like personally, like my major specifically is really good for just being a little bit more flexible when it comes to these things. But I know for other majors, it's a little bit more set in stone and where they don't have as much diversity in what the courses they can take and what classes they can explore and things like that. But I think that it really is major dependent. And so for me, I'm very lucky to have that opportunity to come in with a lot of credits from high school and to be able to actually explore a double major, like, explore different minors and choose things that I want to add on to my current degree plan.
I fully agree with what Anish said. I'm also in neuroscience, and my course load, we also have leeway for several electives and minors, or even explore a double major that I have done so and added a finance minor. So I'm privileged with my major, definitely major dependent, but I do get to explore other pathways.
Adding on to that, we have a similar kind of system at Yale, but we call them distributional requirements. And so each student is required to take, for example, a language class, a writing class, a math class. But what you want to take is completely dependent to you. And I think that, again, allows you to be very flexible, like they've said, to kind of explore other passions or interests. But what I have noticed, especially in my first year, when we talk about scheduling, I've noticed a lot of people start to take what we kind of call gut classes or easy classes that will be an A, just so that they can save their GPA. And I think that is really telling to a lot of people, again, not going for their interests or their passions because they're scared of how that might negatively affect them in the long run. And so I think that's an interesting point to add as well, that there are, ways, implemented into these systems that people can explore their interests, but it's not always practical when it comes to a lot of students, especially at these schools, in the long run, always striving for, that 4.0 GPA and thinking about grad school, like Laylee mentioned.
I appreciate everyone's observations there, and I'm glad we're able to spend a couple of minutes talking about that. Now we're going to shift a little bit to talking about AI and student wellness. As many folks have probably heard, seen, and read, some students are turning to AI tools for emotional or mental health support instead of campus resources. What do you think is driving that choice? And what do you think that leaders in higher education should do to make human support more accessible, trustworthy, and responsive to student needs? Whoever would like to start. All right, Maisha, we're going to you.
Something that I kind of wanted to bring up in this conversation is how I've definitely noticed that AI is being used more and more in an academic sense because kind of like what I had just previously mentioned in the previous question, a lot of students are just very scared of making mistakes, and that really goes against everything that we kind of grew up, learning about learning and how, some of your deepest thinking comes through trial and error and asking questions and struggling through problems. And I think it speaks a lot to the very kind of changing landscape of education that so many students are just so scared of making mistakes and so scared of not being perfect that they're turning to tools like ChatGPT, like Gemini, like countless others, because they know that it will usually, output a correct answer. And I think it really speaks to how connected student well-being and success and academic education have like really come hand in hand. So I think in terms of kind of addressing it from a mental health standpoint, being able to address kind of how we can think about learning in the way that it was previous to AI, bringing it back to encouraging mistakes and encouraging the organic kind of thinking things through. And it's okay to, not say the right thing. It's okay not to write the correct thing. I think would really shift education, in the long run, because AI technology and AI prevalence is only going to increase every single year. So I'm curious to see how it will change, going into my second year as well.
How much is on my paper? Yes. Wait, it might say, right? I have the receipt around it. Oh, like the store credit?
Anish or
Yeah.
Laylee, what are your thoughts? I know we had a pretty lively discussion about this when we were having our prep call. It was fun to watch.
Yeah. I think someone's. There you go. I fully agree with everything Maisha said, and I wanted to touch more on the mental health aspect of AI. I can see and understand why some students may turn to AI for emotional support. It is available at any time, responds immediately, feels private, and may seem less intimidating than speaking with another person face to face. Students may avoid campus resources because of long counseling wait times, which I've experienced, the fear of being judged, uncertainty about confidentiality, previous negative experience, cultural stigma, financials, or even the belief that their concern is not serious enough to deserve help. University leaders, I believe, should not simply tell students to stop using AI. Instead, I believe that they should ask what AI is providing that current support system at their institution is not. AI may help students organize their thoughts or even feel less judged when discussing personal concerns, but it should never replace trained professionals, peer support, or genuine human connection. And universities should invest in the shorter wait times, after-hour services, culturally responsive counseling, peer listening programs, consistent follow-ups, and clear communication about available resources. Students also need education about AI's limitation and when professional support is necessary. And I feel that ultimately human support must feel as accessible, responsive, and non-judgmental as the technology students are already using today.
I think Laylee put it in such great words. But just to add on, I think that essentially a lot of reasons why students choose AI for mental health support or emotional support is just because of the convenience, and especially like in with guys, like they're less likely to be more vulnerable and actually talk about their feelings. There's many studies that have shown this. And so a lot of them choose AI just to, you get a quick response. You don't have to worry about like being judged. You just get like this privacy and comfort when it comes to using AI, because it feels a little bit less intimidating. And as well as the accessibility. So like Laylee said, the long wait times, the scheduling, sometimes it doesn't work out for students with their busy schedules. And so they choose AI, for mental health support. And so a lot of that can be kind of curbed by using kind of a student perspective. So students can talk to students itself, especially those through like at Georgia Tech, we have this thing called the Healthy Jacket Peer Education, our Brave Peer Educators, which are kind of students that go and teach other students about, keeping sure that their well-being is good, giving them advice and tips on how they can be supported on campus, and provides like different initiatives to ensure that well-being can be promoted within campus. And so I think having these student programs is very vital, just because rather than students having to come straight to administrators or clinicians or mental health professionals, they have like a little bit of a understanding through these initiatives. And then when they need the help, they kind of are introduced in how to get that help and how to actively seek out some support systems within campus. And so I think those are two big things that have really helped campus at Georgia Tech.
Thank you so much. Would like to just pause for a quick second to let folks know we're entering our last question here. So if you have any questions, feel free to start putting them in the chat and we'll get to them in the remaining time that we have. So we definitely look forward to hearing more about what you want to hear about from the administrator perspective. So just want to throw that out there. For our last question, my favorite question that I get to ask whenever we do education like this is, what do you wish that leaders in higher education better understood about the student experience? And why don't we start with Laylee?
I wish higher education leaders better understood that students experience college as a whole person, not as simply only academic performers. A student's ability to succeed is very closely connected to whether they feel safe, financially stable, supported, and connected to others. Well-being affects a student's ability to form friendships, maintain relationships, participate in campus life, and envisioning a fulfilling future, not only their grades. And I feel that the most effective support that an institution can give is proactive, accessible, and shaped by their students' voices, which you guys are all doing today. And universities should involve students in the design of their well-being initiatives from the beginning, since students often understand the barriers their peers face better than anyone else. And their experiences should help guide institutional decisions before policies are created, not only after problems arise.
Amazing. What about you, Anish?
So essentially, when we come to campus, students come to campus with their entire lives with them. So that means a lot of students have experienced things called ACEs. I was privileged enough to learn about this in the past summer through a research program. And ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. So this includes things like family instability, loss, um, maybe abuse, domestic violence, these different things, they come from these environments. And sometimes they might not know how to respond to like stress, different relationship problems, academics, or just the new environment itself. But rather than defining students by their past, I think universities should really look to understand that everyone starts college with these different circumstances and they might not have the support system from before and they're kind of looking for that at these campuses. And so I think students can kind of go to these leaders on their campus and look for academic advising, counseling, financial assistance, all that can be tailored to their needs. I think rather than looking at students as just as rather like a group of students, can look at them individually and see how can you help each individual student in whatever ways that you can through the resources that are on campus. I think that students should really feel that it's okay to ask for help. It's a normal part. It's not just showing that, oh, I'm failing, like, oh, like I'm looking for some support, rather than seeing them as a struggling student, like looking at them as students who are looking for support itself, kind of destigmatizing the fact that students are looking for that support, looking for that help.
I guess to close things off, one thing I hope university leaders remember is that today's students are incredibly invested in their campuses. I mean, they serve as our second home for a large majority of the year. And so we don't want to just receive decisions, we actually want to help shape them. At the end of the day, university leaders are not university students right now. And so us students are the ones living with these experiences every day. So our perspectives can provide a lot of insights that aren't always visible from an administrative level. I mean, when we go to college, we wake up there, we eat all of our meals there, we go to class there, everyone we meet is in the same community. So we care about it so, so much, and we want to see it thrive just as much as anyone else. And so I hope that this conversation definitely brings to light just how much we care about our communities and how much we would love to be a part of every decision that gets made.
I think that's an incredible note to transition on. First, I would like to go to a question from Kristen here. Communication about resources is incredibly important and so difficult to do. What recommendations do you have about how to effectively and proactively communicate with students about campus resources? Would love to open it up to whoever would like to go first. And I also would love to jump in on that question.
I think to answer that question, I think one of the best ways to essentially effectively and proactively communicate what resources are on campus is through having other students. Word of mouth is a really big way, as well as having other students kind of represent these different resources, having them as like essentially like ambassadors, peer educators, or things like that. For me, I've always been really big in talking to other students and kind of learning about what they've used on campus, what they've experienced. And so that's really helped me kind of see where I can get that access to these different resources, where I can find support systems and things like that. And so having kind of students be the forefront of really showing what these resources are all about and how to find them is really good, just because it's also a lot less intimidating. It's more easy to go to another student and be like, hey, have you used this resource? Like, how does it work? Like, how can I get access to it? Things like that.
Yeah, so we talked about well-being and in terms of academic competition. So I feel like we should be initiating and building collaboration instead of constant competition in classes and in rooms that we're in. So discussions, peer learning, and group problem solving in a class, I feel can make definitely a big difference in students' lives in their community rather than everyone being solo and competing with each other.
Kind of want to reemphasize what Anish was saying. At Yale, we've been lucky enough to have a lot of different groups that support a lot of different organizations. We have one, like I mentioned, for the FGLI, First Generation Low Income Community. We have some for the science community, and I'm sure a bunch that I'm not even familiar with. But I think it really is helpful to have an upperclassman that, has lived through our exact same experience as us, kind of highlight some of the most important resources that they have found helpful. It builds a sense of trust when it is, a classmate and a peer who is kind of guiding you to these resources. And it definitely allows you to navigate such a vast community much easier.
We had a very similar experience at UT Austin, and I think definitely agree with you, Maisha and Anish, of like just the peer mentorship is huge. We see it in terms of the context of mental health. We also see it in the context of academia. I think two things that I would like to highlight in terms of the direct question, on communication is making resources visible. A lot easier said than done, but I think two actionable ways that I'd like to point to that the Coalition for Student Wellbeing has been heavily involved in. One is on adding the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline to student IDs. Even if your institution has digital IDs, there's ways to do it that are actually much easier because no one has to reprint IDs at any point. So something to consider. That is kind of the focus of our national advocacy campaign right now at the Coalition. We're super proud to have impacted over 400,000 students through that at the beginning of this year. And so much of that has been due to collaboration like this of administrators and students coming together. I'm actually going to put my email real quick in the chat. We've developed at the Coalition a number of resources both for students and administrators that are working on trying to get that initiative implemented. And so if that's something of interest to you, I'm always happy to either chat over email or find time for us to talk virtually about that because we're on a road to my goal is for us to impact 1 million students through the initiative. So a little bit over 40% of the way there. And it's been awesome to see the initiative take off across the country. 25 states require it by law now. There's federal legislation. It's incredibly bipartisan, being carried by none other than Senator John Kennedy and Senator Cory Booker. So great combo there. And second, an emerging trend that I've seen from my kind of position with the coalition is more and more institutions that have added well-being tabs to Canvas or whatever your e-learning module is. That pretty much has typically one of two ways that schools have gone about doing it. One is actually having education about the pillars of well-being, about student support from disability and accommodation to where to get emergency leave, to where to access counseling, to some schools just kind of have it as a hyperlink to their counseling tab. That is something that we've seen spreading more and more, which is just great to see. I think, kind of to the point of our question on AI, I think a lot of the stem of this problem is, to your point, education and communication, especially at institutions that are of background of being members of you tending to be larger, more well-resourced universities. It's not always necessarily the case that the resources aren't there. It's mainly that they're not aware and accessible. And so I think both of those initiatives are two things that we're working on, similar to the kind of educational materials that we've developed for 988. We're also working on doing a replica campaign of that around adding a well-being module. So soon we'll be releasing a toolkit for students of how to pitch this to their pertinent tech stakeholders, provost stakeholders, et cetera, on their campuses, but then also tailored administration to the perspective of administrators like yourself. So if that's of interest, please also feel free to reach out. Now I would like to turn real quick to a question from Brian. I feel like we've already touched upon this a little bit actually in our question before, but maybe we can put more of an academic spin to this of, what teaching strategies do you think that best support student well-being? Very broad question, but I loved our conversation that we are kind of beginning to have on that. So whoever would like to jump in, go for it.
I think it kind of ties back to our conversation about AI in academic settings and how a lot of students are using it, in lieu of making mistakes naturally. I think a grading system that would be really beneficial for a lot of students is one that um, really emphasizes participation and one that emphasizes, um, not having things completely correct on the first try. I haven't had a class like this personally in my first year, but I know a lot of my friends have. It was in their math classes, how their homework was not graded by um, accuracy, but more so on a trial and error. Submitting your work and seeing, can I see all of the work in your process and how you got an answer to this question? And I think um, just even by talking to her, I noticed how she was much more at ease every time she was doing her homework or studying for tests because she had a much greater understanding of all the material she was doing. And she wasn't so scared that each homework assignment was gonna, tank her grade. So I'm not entirely sure how, doable that is on a greater sense across different disciplines and different schools. But I think having a grading system in place that really encourages students to just simply try and not get everything correct on the first try would be really beneficial so that students aren't so, stressed out about constantly being perfect.
I fully agree with what Maisha said, and I feel like failing is a part of the journey to succeeding. And I also had a friend who had a class like this where there was frequent low stake assessment, such she had smaller quizzes, drafts, and check-ins instead of making her entire grade depend on 2 exams, which a lot of professors do. I feel like this encourages learning while reducing extreme pressure, especially in these fast-paced courses.
Awesome. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, I think adding on to that, I think having constructive feedback rather than just giving grades, can be really helpful just because you kind of understand where exactly you're going wrong, how to kind of fix that or how to kind of mitigate that for future assignments could be really helpful within coursework.
Awesome. We have a question from Luis Thomas. Um, how could the first year seminar contribute to your well-being? Looking back on your first year, how did your first year seminar help you adjust to college, introduce you to the academic community? What aspects of the course are most valuable to you? What do you wish that you'd been introduced to as you navigate these first steps of your college education? So feel free to take a stab at any of those. And Luis, as they answer, I'm actually going to send you a link to, I did a whole podcast for Inside Higher Ed about this. So we'll send that to you as they're answering.
I feel like in first year seminars, right off the bat, administrators or the professor should send out and make resources available and known or visible and accessible to students. So either sending that in an email or whichever platform they use, Canvas, having those links easily accessible there is definitely would be more beneficial for first year students.
I think something that was really beneficial for my experience in first year seminars is that as opposed to some of my bigger general elective lectures that were 300 people in one huge room, it was 15 students, first year students, just sitting around a table and talking about whatever the topic was for that day. And while it wasn't always, related to mental health or our personal experiences, I think just knowing that there was a community of, 14 other just as scared first years, as I was, I think was really beneficial knowing that we were all navigating this coursework and this new lifestyle together was super beneficial. So I think going forward, like Laylee said, I think first year seminars, professors or anyone who kind of controls or runs those groups have a very special and unique kind of role in shaping first year's experiences, especially in an academic sense.
Awesome. Anish, question for you from Jennifer Leach. You mentioned male loneliness. What strategies can campuses invest in to help support males? Do you think that peer mentorship would work?
I definitely think that peer mentorship is a big thing that could definitely work with this. I also think it's a good way to destigmatize the fact that it's harder to be vulnerable as a guy, I think, just because of the social stigma, but kind of emphasizing the fact that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to look for these support systems, these support groups. Um, One of the coalition's former members actually created a club, the Men Conversation, and so I think doing something like that, having this way where men can really have that opportunity to look for those support groups, those support systems centered on destigmatizing their issues. And talking about that is something that could really benefit campuses, especially with male loneliness and male mental health.
I think to jump in here a little bit too, I think a lot of it is around trust and stigma, at least in my personal viewpoint and experiences. I think and a lot of that I think comes down to communication. Like I wish something that more men understood is the fact that most people, I believe the statistic is the average person sees 3 therapists before they find one that's a fit to them. And I have literally countless friends. I wish I kept track, and I might start keeping a tally of friends who have went and they've tried therapy and they haven't liked it. And I'll be talking to them and I'll literally be like, try it one more time. Like try it with someone else. Of like, believe it or not, it is normal, unfortunate, and it's a different problem to address, but normal to go through this experience of having to see multiple people. And I think, another kind of through line here is I think that is one of the biggest benefits of virtual care in the context of not replacing in-person care, but in terms of counseling and therapy, is it broadens the pool of everybody to be able to find who best serves them. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do in terms of public policy, but also a strong role that the private sector can play in being able to better curate that pool and get people better care quicker. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question. Is this Tulane? Okay, sweet. I think we've actually hit all of our questions here. So just incredibly grateful to Maisha, Laylee, and Anish for taking time out of the last couple of days of their summer to join us here to share their perspective. We're so lucky to get to work with them as often as we do at the coalition. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Steve and Angela for their consistent partnership throughout the 2 years that the Coalition for Student Wellbeing has been around. And I hope to have the opportunity to continue this conversation with many of you. I threw my email in the chat. Please never hesitate to reach out. One of my favorite parts, I have many favorite parts about the job of running the coalition, but one of them is when administrators just kind of reach out to us out of the blue. I've often said that this coalition, kind of to my very pleasant surprise, has become a coalition of administrators just as it is students. And I think that's enabled us to have the impact that we've had at such a young organizational age. So with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Carson. I've had the experience of being in hotel rooms, when I'm traveling, and there's Carson and the students from the coalition, in an advertisement here and there all around the country. You're doing such amazing things and really leaning into a critically and urgently important topic. And we're grateful to you all. You see the gratitude being expressed in the chat and otherwise from all those who've joined us today. We all share it. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your taking time to offer your perspectives and to help us all be better at this important work. And thanks to you, Angela, of course, and your coalition, LearningWell Coalition colleagues. We look forward to future such events and partnership with you as well. And thanks for your kind words today. So for everyone who's joined us, just be reminded that this recording will be posted at ueru.org and via YouTube. Please share it widely. There's no limitation on how you share it, and bring other colleagues into this conversation. We thank you for that. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great fall semester.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.